Welcome to Community at Coast. We're so excited you're joining with us again tonight. So we're going to jump back into the life of Christ. We're going to be in John chapter 11 today. John chapter 11 as we continue on in the chronology of Christ. And Community at Coast, we spend some time learning the Word and then investing into relationships with each other. So excited to jump into the Word with you tonight. But before we do, let us pray. Lord, we thank you for your word. And God, we thank you that it is by your Spirit that you give us understanding, and it is by your Spirit and truth that you lead us and transform us and change us by revealing yourself. So Lord, I pray that tonight, through this teaching, by the power of your Spirit, that you would reveal yourself to us, that we would know you as life, as the resurrection and the life. And Lord, that in knowing this, we would believe and we would be transformed. So Lord, I thank you for this word, and I pray that you would fill me afresh with your Spirit and everyone that's listening afresh with your Spirit, that you would transform us, Lord, for your glory ultimately, God, and for our good. I pray these things in your name and for your glory. Everyone said, amen. All right, so as we're continuing on in the life of Christ, as we've been just walking with Jesus down his journey, in John chapter 11 is where we find ourselves, and it's a very familiar story. It's Lazarus, the brother of Mary and Martha, who has died. And it's a very familiar story. Now, I want to remind us that in the book of John, tradition, history says that John knew that the other gospels were in circulation already when he was writing his gospel. So he was very selective in what he put down. A lot of the things that he said you don't find in the other gospels. He was very specific and selective on what he decided to write, obviously inspired by the Holy Spirit for our benefit. In the gospel, he has a total of 8 signs that he focuses on. A total of 8 signs that he focuses on. We find ourselves with the raising of Lazarus, and it's the 7th sign. Now, all the signs you see as John tells the story, he focuses on believing and the responses of the people in response to Jesus and these signs that he performs. And he focuses on the people's response to Jesus, either their rejection of him or their believing of him. So he's very specific in why he chose the specific stories to tell of Jesus' life. We know at the end of the book, he says if all the things that could be written about Jesus were written down in books, it would fill the world. So the ones he chose were for a purpose, and I believe in the sovereignty of God for this moment for us, that this story where we find ourselves in this current context is for us, where you are, where I am in our lives. So I'm excited to jump in with you. John gives a summary statement, though, in his book of why he wrote these stories down. I think that will help us as we jump into this teaching today. So in John chapter 20, I'm going to flip over there real quick. John chapter 20, Jesus says in verse 30, John says about Jesus in verse 30, and truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written, the ones that we're reading about, these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. That you may have life in his name. I want us to remember that as we jump into this story. Now, we begin in John chapter 11. It says, now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore, the sisters, Mary and Martha, sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. Now we see in this story there's a shift in John's writings, and this specific sign is directed, as we see, to those whom he loves. We saw in the other signs that we saw of Jesus' life written down in the book of John, there was the sign at first of him turning water to wine, his first sign, and it was for the servants who saw the miracle happen, and yet even the master of the feast went to the bridegroom, was like, man, you saved the best for last. Even he didn't know where it came from. And you see the belief systems working at play already. And the next was Nicodemus. In chapter 2, Nicodemus came to him by night, and he taught him about believing and what he needed to believe in, that he needed to be born again. The next sign we find in the Gospels is when he heals the nobleman's son. And Jesus even says to them, unless you see signs, you won't believe. And yet he heals the nobleman's son and tells him to go. Your son is healed. And the man believed and went. And he continued on with signs. There was the healing of the lame man by the pool of Bethesda. And he heals this lame man. And yet we see the lame man going and kind of ratting out Jesus. And we see the response of those people to Jesus and to his signs. There was the feeding of the 5,000, right? We know, and yet they continue to seek him. Why? Because they were hungry again. They saw these signs, and yet they didn't believe. There was the walking of the water, the healing of a blind man. And now we see this sign, the raising of Lazarus, and it's the seventh sign. And this is specifically directed towards those whom he loved. Right? Mary, Martha, Lazarus, those who he loved. And you look at verse 4, it says, when Jesus heard this, when he heard word from the sisters that him who he loved is sick, he said, verse 4, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister, Lazarus. Later on, you will see in verse 11, he says, these things he said, and afterwards he said to them, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go to wake him. Then the disciples were discussing between themselves, if he's sleeping, he will get well. Verse 14, it says, Lazarus is dead, but I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. So he's directing these to his disciples. Our friend Lazarus sleeps. Our friend, it's for Mary, Martha, the disciples. The story is for them. And I think this is significant. I'm harping on it for a second because it's for those he loved and his friends. And I think for us as the church, a lot of times we can read this story, and yes, evangelical in context, bringing death to life. But I want us to hear it as believers. It was dedicated focusing towards Mary and Martha and the disciples. They believed in Christ. They were following him. And yet he had something to teach them through this story. Those he loved, those that believed in him, those that were following. He had something specific for them. So trying to harp on it so that we would perk up our ears and listen to what he has to say. This was for us. This was for them, those he loved. Verse 4 again. When Jesus heard that, he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified in them, be glorified in it. The point of this teaching tonight, if you're going to title it anything, is that by believing you may have life. That by believing, you may have life. That was the point of writing the Gospel of John. John said that all these things are written that by believing in Jesus, you may have life in his name, that you would believe that he was the Son of God, and that you, by believing, you would have life in his name. Now, this sign was to glorify God, to increase our believing. Now, Jesus loved Mary and Martha, her sister. After he heard this news, verse 5, Jesus loved Mary and Martha, his sister, and Lazarus. So verse 6, so when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. So, wait a second, you love them. You love Mary and Martha, you love Lazarus. You hear that he is sick, yet you stay 2 days. You stay 2 more days in the place where you were, and you would think, and I love this person, he's sick, I'm going to immediately run over as soon as I can. But again, let's remind ourselves, Jesus said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God. But for the glory of God. The way God brings glory to himself, the purpose of this sign, he's always purposeful. If you're going to take a note or make a point, the way God brings himself glory is always purposeful. Is always purposeful. He had a purpose in why he did what he did. Why the situation was allowed. And he waited 2 days. The purpose is what he was after, and it was to bring glory to him. The process that God was going to be glorified in is in light of loving Mary and Martha. You have to remember that even though he's going to glorify himself, even though he waits 2 days, it's those he loved he's doing this for. And he was purposeful. And yet, he stayed 2 more days. And it might not seem to be loving to wait, but it was for the glory of God, but it's also in light of loving the disciples and Mary and Martha. You can't disconnect the two. When God glorifies himself, he still has our good in mind. And I think about the last time Jesus said that this sign was for the glory of God, it was for the man that was born blind. And this man was born blind, and the disciples are walking by, and they see this man sitting there begging blind, and they said to Jesus, what was it, his father? Was it his sin? Was it his mother that this man was born blind? And Jesus said, it was not. It was for the glory of God. This man was born blind, and you're sitting there thinking, man, this man is been born blind his entire life for that moment that God would glorify himself. It may not be pleasing, the situations we find ourselves in. It may not be pleasing the way that God wants to glorify himself in the situation. It may not seem pleasing to us. But I want to remind ourselves in this text, it's always purposeful. It's always purposeful, and he knows why he's doing it, and it's in light of those that he loves. Not disconnected from love, but in light of it. He's purposeful in the way he glorifies himself. This man was born blind, and yet used it for the glory of God, and it transformed and changed that blind man's life. We're going to see it again in this story. Now, we're going to skip down to verse 14. Verse 14 in the text. Sorry, I lost my place. Then Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and I'm glad for your sakes. I am glad for your sakes that my friend is dead. I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, speaking to the disciples, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him. The disciples were actually confused at this point. They waited 2 more days, and Jesus was like, okay, let's go down to Judea to go to Lazarus. And they're like, wait, but you remember what happened last time you were there. The Pharisees wanted to kill you. Now you want to go? Jesus, let's not go. Remember that they wanted to kill you. And he said, well, our friend sleeps. Lazarus sleeps, speaking that he was dead. Disciples, very confused, were like, well, if he sleeps, he's going to wake up, so let's not go. Jesus, I don't know if you know what you're doing. Even though you've given us direction to go with you there, we don't think it's a good idea. The way in which you want to glorify yourself, it doesn't seem like a good idea to obey you in this. It doesn't seem like this is right. You're going to be killed. And he said, for your sake, to believe. Lazarus is dead, and I'm glad, so that you would believe. So let's go. And I think it's funny, if you look down to verse 16, there's Thomas. Then Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, well, let's go. Let's go die with him. Let's all also go that we may die with him. Well, we're all going to die. Let's go. Here we go. And the response of the disciples, there was a lack of belief. There was fear. There was confusion in how Jesus was deciding to glorify himself in this situation. And I'm hoping you can relate. I can relate to this confusion when you've been walking with Jesus and he's asking you or walking you through a circumstance and you're like, man, this is not how I think it should go. I think if we go this way and what you're telling me to do, this is not going to end good. And it doesn't seem like it's loving. Something's happening in my life and yet it seems like you're distant. You've waited 2 days for anything. I don't understand. Well, if you find yourself there, like I find myself many times, we're in a good place. Well, the story is for us, that we may believe, like Mary and Martha and the disciples. So in summary, so far, right, the disciples are in confusion. Jesus already told Mary and Martha and the sisters that this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God. There's confusion. Now we find ourselves in verse 17. How does Mary and Martha respond to this situation? So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Wait, Jesus, you said that this sickness wasn't unto death. Now he's been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles away. Verse 19, and many of the Jews had joined the women around Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. They were in mourning. They had heard from Jesus the sickness would not be unto death and their brother dies. 4 days has gone by. He's been in the tomb. And now they're being comforted in mourning. Probably confused like the disciples. I thought you said this wasn't unto death. Now Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him, but Mary was sitting in the house. Now Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And you see, you have to give it to Mary in this circumstance. She at least does right. When there is confusion, when you don't understand what's going on, when you don't understand how God's glorifying him in the circumstance, how this could be for your good, how this could be loving, she does the right thing. She goes to Jesus. In all her confusion and all her misunderstanding, she goes to him. And she says, Lord, if you would have been here, if you would have just been here, like if you would have came when we called for you over 4 days ago, if you would have came, he would have still been alive. And loving, merciful Jesus, in her confusion, in her not understanding, in the lack of belief, he reminds her, again in verse 23, your brother will rise again. In verse 24, Martha then said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And Jesus says to her in verse 25, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Jesus gives her a completely different way of looking at life and death. She thought that she knew. She thought that she understood. I know you say he's going to live. You said this would not be unto death, yet he's dead. So you have to be talking about the resurrection in the last day that's to come. And he corrects her gently. And he says to her, I am the resurrection. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? I am the resurrection and life. And he who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. Wait, Jesus, what are you talking about here? And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. But my brother's dead. What do you mean that he shall never die? If he believes in me, he believed in you, and yet he's dead. And you say he shall never die. Jesus here is completely changing the way that we view life and even death, or circumstances that we find ourselves in. He calls himself the life. He calls himself the resurrection. And though Martha thought that she knew, he completely is changing the way that she saw this situation. And I pray that through this story, in the circumstances that we find ourselves today, though we may not understand how God's leading us, though we may not understand how he's getting glory in this situation, though we may not understand what he means, we might be confused. We allow him to completely transform the way that we view our circumstances, that we would view him as life. And the question that he asks Martha, do you believe this? I ask us, do we believe? This is the question. Do we believe him to be the life, the resurrection? Let's give Martha a second here and some credit. As though she was confused, she went to him for understanding. He completely rocks these sisters' world and their understanding of what he meant by life. You see in verse 26, and whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Well, this cannot mean that they will never die physically because Lazarus is dead. So what does he mean by that they will never die? And even in dying, they would believe. They would believe that even in dying, they would find life. And the question is a question of belief. Do you believe this? Do you believe that Jesus transforms the way that you live life? Do you believe that in Christ and abiding in him and abiding in his word, that the promises that he gives us of the eternal life to come, that it would change the way that we live life, that even if we walk through circumstances of death, that we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we shall fear no evil because of Christ. That he would transform the way that we live, the way that we have our being. That in living, even though we face circumstances of death, we find life in Jesus. We find life in those circumstances in believing. Let's continue on with our story. So he asks her, do you believe? In verse 27, she says to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. Remember what John said the purpose of this book was. She got it. She said, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God. John said, and adds the point that she's missing here, and that you may have life. That if you believe in him, you may have life in his name. And the purpose of this teaching, the sign is that he would increase believing in them, that they would believe him to be the life, no matter what circumstances they're walking through. So in verse 28, when she had said these things, and when she had said these things, she went her way. And she goes to Mary and tells her that Jesus is coming. And we find in verse 32 that Mary goes to Jesus. And when Mary came to Jesus, verse 32, when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet saying, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Therefore, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her weeping, he groaned in his spirit and was troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? Speaking of Lazarus. And they said to him, Lord, come and see. And Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. And I want us to look here, when he saw Mary weeping and the people weeping, it said that he was groaned in his spirit. He had told them that this sickness was not unto death, but for the glory of God, and sees them living in sorrow, sees them living in feeling the situation of losing a brother. And they're weeping, and Jesus is moved by their sadness, by their unbelief and feeling the pain of the situation that they're walking through, their misunderstanding and not believing Jesus at his word that he was the resurrection and life and he was going to do something in the situation for the glory of God, and that he loved them and saw their pain and felt moved and grieved and wept. It says that the Jews said, see how he loved him, but you see that he was moved and groaned when he saw Mary and the Jews weeping. And some of them said, could not this man who opened the eyes of a blind man also have kept this man from dying? Yes. But again, do you believe this was the purpose? That he would increase their faith, that he would show them life and how they are to live it in the face of misunderstanding, in the face of circumstances of death, a new way of seeing Christ and living. So, then Jesus, again groaning in himself, in verse 38, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and the stone lay against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he had been there dead for 4 days. And you see Jesus correcting unbelief. Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? You catch a theme all throughout this. Jesus is trying to increase faith in this circumstance. And I want us to see this and increase faith in our circumstances. Not that Jesus is uncaring and unfeeling by walking us through circumstances that are hard. They lost their brother, and it was painful, and he sees it and meets us there. Yes, he stayed for 2 days, but the purpose was for the glory of God, but also for our good and for our faith. Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he had been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not say to you this, that if you would believe, that you would see the glory of God? Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. And I know that you always hear me. And because of the people who are standing by me, I said this, that they may believe, again, belief, that you sent me. Now when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he who had died came out bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with cloths. And Jesus said to them, loose him and let him go. And he who had died came out bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said, loose him. The dead man came to life. Dead man came to life. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? And Jesus told the disciples, he told Mary and Martha that this was not going to be unto death. He repeated himself, and yet they were mourning and not believing, and he raised Lazarus from the dead. And we were like, yes, of course, he said it. He said he was going to do it, and this is amazing. And yet I find myself at times wondering how they could see all these things. I mean, if I saw these things, if I saw Jesus call a dead man who's been dead for 4 days and calls him by name, and the man comes out of a tomb wrapped in grave clothes, and you unwrap him and the man's alive, man, if I would see this, like, I don't get how they can walk away. In verse 45, it says that many of the Jews who had come to Mary and had seen these things Jesus did believed in him. But some of them went away to the Pharisees and told them the things that Jesus did. I'm like, are you kidding me? They're going to rat on Jesus and he just raised a dead man? And then I think to myself, what was the purpose of this book? What was the purpose of this story? And Jesus said it again, these things were written in the book of John. John says in this book, these things were written so that you may believe. Man, if I would have seen this, my life would have been rocked. Of course I would have seen how Jesus is the resurrection and the life, and that in him, he is life, and that even though he walks me through circumstances, I can believe him at his word. I believe that in the days to come, that he's going to call me by name. He's going to call his people, and we're going to rise up with him and be with him in paradise for an eternity. And this life is but a moment. And the things that he walks us through in this life for the glory of God, there's for a purpose. If I would have seen this happen, this would have completely transformed my life. Well, we don't see it happen to the people that see it with their eyes. So maybe it's not because we don't see. Like John says, these things were written so that we would believe. So again, the question is, do we believe? Do we believe this story? Do we believe this? Do we believe that he is the resurrection and the life? Do we believe that he cares? Do we believe that we have life in his name? That he makes even living, even death living. He makes it life. That even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, that even if it bring about death, it would be for the glory of God, and we know that it is for our good. Do we believe this? And I would have to say to myself that I struggle. It's not that I need to see this in the flesh. These stories are written for me and for you. But the question is, do we believe? Do we believe this? And I want us just to close. I'm going to flip us over to 1 Corinthians in chapter 4. The question is believing and how we will see the circumstance that Jesus is walking us through. Do we take the story of Mary and Martha and Lazarus and how he raised a dead man to life, even though the circumstance looked bleak? There was no possible way. He'd been dead for 4 days, yet he said it. Do we believe? In verse 16 of 2 Corinthians chapter 4, it says, "Therefore, we do not lose heart. Even though our outward man is perishing, death, yet our inward man is being renewed, life, day by day. Though for our light affliction, death, which is but for a moment, and there's life, it's working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory." A far more exceeding eternal weight of glory. It's working it for us. Will we believe it? I don't know what circumstances you find yourself. What circumstances you're having trouble believing. Instead of blaming the circumstances, I ask us to see, will we believe? Do you believe this? Like Jesus asked Mary and Martha. We believe that he's renewing us day by day through his word, through relationship with him, that believing him and walking in obedience, listening to what he says, believing what he says, and doing what he says to do, forgiving when he says to forgive. Let's bring it practical. Studying his word, being vulnerable with small groups, getting in life together, sharing, confessing our sins. When he tells us to put off, we put off. We no longer make excuses for anger or greed or gossip. We believe him in his word and believe that he has the power to raise life in us, that he is the resurrection. Will we believe this? Back up in verse 7, it says, "We are hard pressed on every side." The circumstances could seem bleak, hard pressed on every side, yet not crushed. Life. We are perplexed, death, but in Christ and not in despair. Persecuted. We walk through persecution, but in Christ, this new life, we're not forsaken. Struck down, but in Christ, not destroyed. Always carrying about in the body the dying of the Lord Jesus, that the life of Jesus also may be manifested or glorified in our bodies. Will we choose to believe? Will we choose to believe at his word, him at his word, even though we walk through circumstances that seem like death? Will we believe that he is the life and there's purpose in it for us? It's purpose in the way he glorifies himself, and it is for our good. Will we believe? So as you think through the circumstances you are walking through, whether it is relational, financial, health-related, sin struggles that we find ourselves in, will we choose to believe? Will we focus on the death, or will we focus on Christ, life, and give us a new perspective on how we are to walk through these circumstances? Will we take a moment right now to quiet ourselves in our unbelief? The Lord knows where you're at, what you're walking through. Will you take a moment to quiet yourself in the circumstances you find yourself in, the unbelief of not believing how he's going to work out, what he's going to work out in this circumstance, and how it could be good? Would you quiet yourself now? And I ask you to listen to the words of Jesus. Lazarus, come forth. His word has power and life. He is the life. He is life in the resurrection. Will we choose to believe? Let us pray. God, I thank you for your word, and you know the circumstances we find ourselves in. And though they're difficult, and you know and you see, and God, I pray that your church would grow today in believing, though you walked them through hard circumstances, and how Mary and Martha and the disciples, they struggled through this hard word that how can death be living? And Lord, how could you bring life to the circumstance? Lord, I pray that we would see you as life and resurrection, that we would believe you at your word and trust that you work out all things together for the good of those who love you and are called according to your purpose. And Lord, that you have purposes in all that you do, and therefore are good because you love us, and that your glory is for our good ultimately. And Lord, I pray that this story would become something that we believe. Not that we would need to see it ourselves, but we believe it because you wrote it down and you said it to us. That this actually happened, and it would transform our life and how we walk through circumstances that seem difficult, that we would trust you at your word. So Lord, I pray for the power you've allowed to live within jars of clay, that it would bring life to our church for the glory of your name and for the good of your people. Pray this name is in your name. Amen. Now, just as you guys know, time for you to jump into your life groups. If you don't have one, you know that link you can click on the Connect tab, and they'll link you right into a life group where you can dive more deeper together in this text. All right, you're loved.